The forest was alive with shadows and the sound of desperate footsteps. She ran, branches clawing at her face, drawing thin lines of blood. Her breath tore through the night air in ragged gasps. Overhead, moonlight pierced the canopy in sharp, silver slashes, illuminating her path in flashes. In her trembling hand, her phone blinked. 1% battery, then nothing. The GPS signal vanished. She stumbled, turned. Something was back there, moving fast, too fast. Mud swallowed her foot, and she went down hard. The air knocked from her lungs. Groping blindly, her fingers found her purse. She dug through it in panic. Lipstick, keys, a small can of mace. And then her hand brushed against a silver charm, but it was too late. A shadow eclipsed the moonlight, looming over her. Her scream tore through the forest, then silence. They always scream, always. Doesn't matter how fast they run, or how clever they think they are. If you match during a full moon, you're already dead. But tonight, the wrong girl swiped right. If you love horror stories about monsters, witches, and deadly twists, you're in the right place. Before we dive into this blood-soaked tale, do me a favor. Tap that bell like it's your last defense. Hit like. It fuels the dark magic. Share with a fellow horror addict. And if you're new here, subscribe. Because we're just getting started and monsters aren't the only ones watching. They always found the bodies on mornings after a full moon. Not neatly laid out, not buried. Just left, torn open, like paper dolls shredded by a careless child. Torsos hollowed, faces twisted mid-scream. Police statements described wild, animal attacks, though no species was ever named. No bear, no wolf, not even a mountain lion. Whatever did this wasn't native, if it was ever meant to exist at all. And one detail always slipped through the cracks. Each of the women had gone on a date the night they vanished. Different towns. Same app. Moonmeat, cute name, right? Too cute. Like calling a loaded gun a paperweight. Emily Winters, 24, true crime junkie and self-professed armchair detective, didn't believe in coincidences. She also didn't believe in caution, at least not the kind that kept you on the sidelines. Her YouTube feed was a rotation of cold cases and deep dives into cryptid sightings. She could recite the Black Dahlia timeline in her sleep. While other girls her age were posting latte photos, Emily was reconstructing murder scenes in her sketchpad. But this wasn't a case for commentary. This was a pattern, and patterns could be baited. The deaths weren't random. Emily had spent the last month building a twisted vision board in her bedroom. Digital maps marked with blood-red thumbtacks. Each tack, a corpse. Strings of yarn connected dates, names, moon phases. All the women had used moon meat. All had matched with, and whose profiles mysteriously disappeared after the dates. Each body had been found within 3 miles of a public forest trail, always on a full moon. She wasn't chasing theories anymore. She was laying a trap. Emily created a new profile, Raven, with 2 N's because of course. The photo was carefully curated. Wind-swept black hair, dark lipstick, and a smirk that said, "Come closer, but not too close." Her bio? Cryptic. A flirt with a razor edge. Looking for something dangerous. Don't bore me. It didn't take long. 3 nights before the next full moon, she matched with a man named Lucas. His profile photo was filtered and dim, his face half in shadow. There were no daytime pictures, only dusky shots in wooded areas. His bio read, "Looking for someone wild." Emily felt the hairs on her arms prickle. Gotcha. She messaged first, of course. Raven, you look like trouble, I like trouble. Lucas, do you now? Trouble likes to bite. They chatted for hours. Lucas was clever, never too forward, always hinting his job, freelancer, his hobbies, night photography, hiking, stargazing. Emily noted every evasion, every calculated charm. He played the predator, but she was the one setting the snare. On the second night, he invited her on a night hike in Black Hollow Reserve, isolated, underdeveloped, and famously under-patrolled. She accepted. The full moon was tomorrow. As Emily closed her laptop, she smiled, not sweetly. Her kind of smile was sharp, cold. This was more than a trap. This was a hunt. The night before the date, Emily packed like she was going to war. She laid everything out on her bed like relics from a forgotten religion. A silver-bladed hunting knife, freshly sharpened and blessed in a ritual she would never disclose to anyone. Sane. A charm laced with crushed wolfsbane, sewn discreetly into the hem of her jacket collar. A tiny body camera, no bigger than a shirt button, nestled just beneath her lapel and synced to her phone. She wasn't just filming this for evidence. She wanted proof for herself, for the world, for the dark part of her that wanted this to be real. In the mirror, she admired her reflection. Dark jeans, leather jacket, combat boots. She looked like she belonged in a music video for a band that only played after midnight. Her hair was up, practical, and her eyes sparkled with anticipation. When the message came through, her pulse actually fluttered. "Lucas, still up for the hike? I know a place most people don't go. Not marked on the map. Raven, lead the way, lone wolf." They agreed to meet at the edge of the trail, just past 10 p.m. That gave the moon time to rise. Emily had checked the weather obsessively. Clear skies, no chance of cloud cover, perfect visibility. She drove with the windows down, music off. The silence was ritual. Trees rose like black sentinels as she approached Black Hollow. By the time she parked, her stomach was a knot of nerves and thrill. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was excitement, the kind that came before a reveal. Before the curtain lifts and the monster steps into the spotlight, he was already waiting. Lucas stood at the tree line, hands in the pockets of a weathered coat. He smiled as she approached, but there was something stiff about it, like it didn't reach his eyes. He was taller than she expected, lean but not lanky, with a quiet presence that felt old, not aged. "Ancient Raven," he said, voice low, smooth. "Even better in person." She smirked. "Same to you. You're not as grainy in real life." He chuckled. "I like to keep things mysterious." They walked. The trail was narrow, winding through tall pines and thick underbrush. Moonlight filtered through in pale beams, silvering everything it touched. Emily watched his posture, his pace. He walked like someone who'd done this 1,000 times, like someone who didn't have to worry about what waited in the dark. "So," she said, breaking the silence, "what makes you choose night hikes? For first dates, seems a little intense." Lucas smiled without turning. "I like to see people when they're out of their element. Moonlight has a way of revealing who someone really is." She glanced up. The moon was full now, bright and heavy in the sky. Her fingers brushed the charm sewn into her jacket. "And what about you?" she asked. "What does the moon reveal about you?" Lucas stopped walking, his head tilted slightly. "That I'm not always good company after dark." There was a pause, then he stepped off the trail. Emily hesitated, letting the moment stretch. She made a show of pretending to debate. Then she followed. The forest grew denser as they moved deeper. Branches arched like ribs overhead. The sounds of crickets and frogs faded. Only the crunch of their footsteps remained. And then, abruptly, Lucas stopped. He was shaking. Barely. His breath hitched. Emily's hand moved subtly toward her belt, brushing the hilt of the knife hidden beneath her jacket. "Are you okay?" she asked, feigning concern. Lucas didn't answer. Instead, he groaned and dropped to his knees. His fingers dug into the dirt, nails lengthening before her eyes. His spine arched unnaturally. Bones cracked like snapping twigs. Hair erupted across his arms, his neck. His jaw jutted forward. Teeth lengthened into fangs that glinted in the moonlight. He looked up, and his eyes burned gold. The change wasn't beautiful. It was violent suffering, like his body hated what it was becoming. Emily watched in silence, her heart hammering with exhilaration. She hadn't just been right. She had found him. As the transformation completed, the thing that was Lucas, taller now, monstrous and primal, snarled and rose to its feet, claws flexed, fur bristling. It stepped toward her, and Emily smiled. The werewolf, because there was no more pretending now, towered over her. Muscles rippled beneath coarse black fur. Its fangs glistened with saliva. It was beautiful in the most terrifying way, a myth given form, a nightmare cast in flesh. But Emily didn't scream. Instead, she stepped back, just one pace, enough to give herself room. "You think I came out here unarmed?" she asked coolly. The creature tilted its head, snarling, confused. With practiced ease, she slipped her hand into her jacket and drew the knife. The blade caught the moonlight and shimmered, silver, unmistakably. A low, guttural growl echoed from the werewolf's throat. Emily lunged. The blade sank into its chest just above the heart. The werewolf roared in agony, its voice a mix of human pain and animal fury. It staggered backward, clutching at the wound, eyes wide in shock. Steam hissed up from where silver met flesh, the sound like meat on a skillet. The smell of burning fur and rot filled the clearing. Lucas, if that was still his name, crashed to his knees, panting, clawing at the earth. The transformation flickered, as if his body couldn't decide whether to stay beast or return to man. "You should have picked someone easier," Emily said, circling him now, voice sharp as the blade in her hand. Someone who didn't notice the patterns. Someone who couldn't read Latin. Someone who didn't research lycanthropy forms in 5 different languages. She crouched beside him, inspecting the seeping wound. It hadn't killed him, it wasn't supposed to. Lucas's golden eyes burned with rage. His lips curled back, but he didn't lunge again. He was weakening. "Who are you?" he growled, voice half-human. Emily's smirk was wicked. "I'm not just someone who hunts monsters." She stood slowly. The air shifted. Her eyes began to glow, not gold, but red, like embers in a dying fire. Her voice dropped several octaves, echoing strangely in the still forest. "I'm something they fear." Lucas tried to rise, but his limbs trembled. "You thought you were Apex," Emily whispered, circling him. "But I've bound demons in salt and cursed men with names so old they choke in the throat. You think silver kills? It binds. And now, you're mine." A gust of wind rushed through the trees, though the branches didn't sway. Emily raised her free hand, and blood began to drip from her fingers, her own, willingly given. She drew a crude, ancient sigil into the dirt around him, humming in a language that hadn't been spoken aloud in centuries. The werewolf tried to rise again, but found itself frozen. Its claws twitched, its limbs locked. The circle glowed faintly. "I didn't come to slay you," Emily murmured, stepping close. "I came to collect." She leaned down, lips near the beast's ear. "You're not the only monster using dating apps." The wind died. The forest was silent. The werewolf's body slumped forward, still breathing, but no longer free. The clearing pulsed with quiet energy, like the air itself held its breath. Emily stood over the bound creature, Lucas, or whatever he was before fur and fang took over. Her sigil glowed faintly, fed by her blood and will. But Lucas was not done. With a guttural growl, he surged upward, howling. The force of it shattered the stillness. His claws slashed through the air, raking against the invisible walls of the sigil. The light flickered. Emily's eyes narrowed. She clenched her fist and spat another word in that forgotten tongue. Seraph Hamortha. The werewolf convulsed, racked by pain that rolled through him like fire, but he didn't stop. With raw, brute force, Lucas pushed against the sigil's edge, snarling, twisting, breaking bones and resetting them in real time. Emily hadn't expected this much resistance. She backed away 2 steps, the knife still, slick with blood in her hand. "You should be down," she hissed. "The sigils bound stronger creatures than you." Lucas raised his head slowly. Blood dripped from his muzzle. His gold eyes flared. "You bound beasts," he growled, voice distorted and inhuman. "Not kings." He lunged. The sigil cracked. Emily rolled sideways, barely dodging his swing. Dirt exploded where his claws hit the ground. The spell had broken. Now it was just her and the beast. Emily's charm flared against her skin, wolfsbane smoke curling into the air as the thread burned away. Lucas recoiled for half a second, enough for her to jab the silver blade into his side. He howled. She pivoted away, but he caught her arm with a clawed swipe. Blood sprayed. She stumbled, gasping. The fight turned brutal. Under the cold gaze of the moon, they danced. Lucas, raw instinct and rage. Emily, calculation and fury, each movement fueled by years of hunting, learning, surviving. He pinned her once, breath hot, against her neck, but she whispered a binding phrase and he recoiled, ears bleeding. She slashed his thigh. He tore into her ribs. They were evenly matched, predator against predator. But monsters are built for endurance. Witches, for strategy, and Emily had planned for everything. As they circled again, breath ragged, blood slicking their skin and fur, Emily reached into her boot and pulled the second blade. This one wasn't silver. It was obsidian, etched with runes that pulsed faintly blue. "You're not the only thing that changes under a full moon," she said, and her voice was not her own. It layered, multiple, like a choir whispering beneath her skin. Lucas hesitated. Emily struck. The blade drove into his abdomen and the runes flashed. Not with pain, with binding. Lucas screamed, his body seizing mid-motion. Veins bulged along his arms and neck, darkening to black. He dropped to his knees, snarling but frozen, trembling. The forest around them seemed to lean in. Emily stood above him, bloodied, breathing hard. Her jacket was torn, her charm scorched, but she was still standing. She knelt beside him again, calmer now. "I wasn't looking for a trophy," she whispered. "I was looking for recruitment." Lucas's mouth twitched, lips curling over his teeth. He tried to speak, but the spell stole his words. "I need monsters like you," Emily continued, "because darker things are coming. Creatures worse than you, things even witches don't walk alone to face." She ran a hand down his matted fur, almost gentle. "And let's face it, you were getting sloppy." The obsidian blade shimmered. Lucas gasped and then slumped, unconscious, still breathing. The glow of the sigil returned, this time wrapping around him, not to trap, but to mark. His body began to change again, not back to human, but into something new. Bound, controlled, useful. Emily stood, swaying slightly. She wiped the blood from her mouth and turned toward the trail. The moon above watched in silence. Later that night, back in the city, the world moved on unaware. A phone screen glowed softly in Emily's dark apartment, its cracked glass reflecting the pale gleam of moonlight through the window. She sat cross-legged on the floor, bandages, wrapping her ribs, a blood-stained towel discarded nearby. A mug of something herbal steamed beside her, bittersweet and pungent, probably wolfsbane and clove. She swiped lazily through profiles. Face after face, names, smiles, carefully worded, bios. Adventurous soul looking for someone to howl with. Love night hikes and deep conversations. Dog lover, full moon enthusiast. Emily smirked. She tapped her finger against the phone's glass. A new feature had appeared on the app. Subtle, tucked away beneath the surface-level filters. Like age and distance, creatures near you, her smile widened. A soft groan echoed from the other room. Not human, not quite beast anymore. Lucas. He lay curled on her apartment floor, breathing slowly, his transformation held in a suspended state by layered enchantments. A shimmering mark pulsed faintly on his collarbone, the same sigil she'd carved into the dirt now branded onto skin. He would live. He would obey. He wasn't the first. He wouldn't be the last. Emily took a sip from her mug, watching the steam curl toward the ceiling. She picked up the phone again, resumed swiping. "I used to think monsters were things that hunted in the dark," her voice whispered in narration, steady and sure. "But the truth is, monsters adapt. Swipe, click, another match." She tilted her head, inspecting the face of a man with oddly sharp canines and no social media links. "Perfect. They don't hide under beds anymore. They hide in DMs. They slide into your matches. Use emojis and good lighting." She rose from the floor, stretching her arms with a wince. "But they're still predictable, still hungry." A final glance at the glowing moon outside. She smiled with all her teeth. "And me? I'm not here to, stop them, beat. I'm here to collect." If you enjoyed this story and want more chilling legends and terrifying tales, make sure to like this video. It really helps us out. You can also click on our Ultimate Werewolf playlist to watch more horror and cryptid stories. The link is in the description below. And if you love horror, folklore, and unexplained mysteries, Subscribe to the channel and join our growing community of fear seekers. But don't stop there. Turn on notifications by clicking the bell icon so you never miss a new story. Because in the world of horror, the scariest things happen when you least expect them. And trust me, you don't want to be left in the dark. Welcome to the darkness.